We looked at the design process. Was our subject. So, what were some of the principles of good practice connecting consumer to digital service design for that design process? And we tried to capture what helps and stops these being adopted. So, themes, principles that came out for us were lots of stuff around being user-centred, clearly, understanding motivation, consumer being at the forefront of your thinking rather than just being an afterthought. There's an interesting idea about having a bit of humility when approaching a design process and losing your assumptions before engaging in it. Then there was this stuff here about being flexible, allowing for complexity, but the difficulty also of needing to provide certainty, which is what I think the political process demands. I think you said that.
It was me.
Can you expand on that a little bit?
It was about a lot of legislation is written about the delivery point at that point in time. So there's a lot of legislation that exists that has print written into the legislation because that was what was around at the time it was written. So how do you build for the fact that you have no idea what the technology is going to be in 5 years' time? How do you design that service when to be open-ended, when actually politicians and service recipients want certainty about what they're going to get and when they're going to get it? So it's just a thought.
That obviously led us on to where the design process meets policy and meets legislators. And we looked at the importance of being up the food chain, to use a sort of parochial term, and the importance of actually influencing policy. And that also led on to some other stuff on the other sheets about an important principle being to, I guess, speak the right language, to be able to engage with policymakers and legislators about design and the design process, and how they can engage in that. Then we got on to interesting topic of iteration and wanting to do beta releases, and how we felt that was actually a really important principle into a design process, to be able to actually test things out, get feedback, improve, so on and so forth. And if possible, it shouldn't just be a sort of big bang approach to taking things, and if possible, to tolerate, even embrace failure, which I'm sure is a topic that might come up elsewhere as well, sort of around innovation. We talked about designing for crowds. There's been a lot of talk about the design process being sort of user-centred on an individual user, trying to understand individual users, but also recognition that sometimes the design process needs to account for groups of people, crowds of people as well. Looking at social networks are designed to work for groups rather than just an individual consumer. We also hoped that maybe framework was brought up, the word framework, of allowing plurality of different suppliers to engage in the design process, to assist that and to allow for that. So I think those were our principles that we got. Just check with my group that I got those as they hoped.
I think one of the things we also talked about is that you can't assume that what you produce will be good enough for everybody, and you should make it so that other suppliers can provide more specialised versions targeted at particular audiences, and you should make it so that is possible.
That's right, yeah. So, what helps with this? Well, we acknowledge that other sectors have, in some cases, provided models that could be drawn on. I think this was your point, Richard.
Issuing the challenge and seeing what comes back to you from those who are better placed to innovate than perhaps you are inside government and inside public service providers.
So that helps. There are people out there who are doing this. We can draw on their example. We felt a need to have open specifications, and then we got on to discuss how that's got to happen before the specification stage as well. Open opportunities for collaboration into what is specified. Although it's acknowledged that some remuneration would help with that. If you expected individuals or companies to engage in that, they might not always be able to do it out of the goodness of their heart. Comms technology obviously helps. Collaboration technology can help with all of this process. And open source thinking and tools we think can help with this. And also using the right language, which can also include visual language. So if you are, say, doing a collaborative design process or co-design, using the right language in that process, and also having the right kind of language in the actual end service, the end product as well. Problems. Thank you, Greg. It's identified that scale can really add risk. If you are changing a benefits system, that is a big undertaking. It involves a lot of money, a lot of risk, a lot of users, and there's potential PR disaster awaiting on the front page of the Daily Mail for you. There's a feeling that we tend to have a bit of a closed culture, which doesn't facilitate data sharing. And also, generally in the UK, there is an expectation of face-to-face arrangement. Would you care to expand on that point again?
I was just talking about in certain countries where they have a more remote culture. If you take Canada and Australia as examples we talked about, they are countries that have had remote ways of being for many, many years that predated online. So those cultures perhaps are more accepting of moving to an online because it made the remoteness easier. We are a very small island and we have a lot of face-to-face interaction just because we're all crowded into a tiny little space. Does that, and I didn't say it did, but does that have a bearing on the way in which we have moved to online, or we are prepared to move online because we have we've come from a different place? So we talked about some of the places that had successes in delivering online services, and we talked about Australia and Canada, and I just posed the question was, are we just a different culture, and does that have an impact on how we choose to take up services, both from the private sector and the public sector?
Then a few more, just looking at the mechanism within government and some of the problems there. It's quite hierarchical. People have certain ways of working where they want stuff in their red boxes and they're not really listening to Twitter or Facebook and things like that. So some problems there of just engaging them, decision makers that is, in a design process. Policy tends not to be user-centric, and again this fact that design process can do so much, but if the policy framework all around it is hostile to that, then that's making your life very difficult. Generally, IT literacy in government was identified as a potential problem. Procurement processes also identified as a problem, can tend to exclude the smaller, more innovative suppliers or innovators, thinkers. And that perhaps there was a lack of a central drive, someone who was really quite central in government, or a body centrally within government that was pushing design thinking and the design process right from that policy stage. So,
right, thoughts, comments, particularly challenges. Don't ask a horrible question. Put on another hat. Harry.
I think you said all the right things, and I agree. And
I'll go now.
My main feeling is that I've heard these things before, and why aren't we actually doing it?
Good question.
Then I kind of, warning, half-formed thought approaching, I kind of got to thinking about the projects I've done and the people within departments who I've worked with, and it suddenly occurs to me that actually a lot of these ideas are a million miles away from what they're thinking. So I'm going to reshape the why aren't we doing it question into the how can we get the people at the coalface and in government familiar with these ideas and actually get them to start working this way, instead of commissioning a website 2 weeks before it has to launch and then imposing ridiculous guidelines and generally making a hash of it.